Welcome, everybody. It's great to see so many people here, especially so many of Gillian's students. We're delighted to have you. I am Martha Seelman. I am the Executive Director of Studio Art Quilt Associates, though we tend to go by our acronym SAQA or SAQA. SAQA is a membership organization of people who are passionate about creating art with fabric and thread. And we wanted to invite you to consider joining us for our virtual conference, which will be a little bit later this month. If you go to saqua.com/virtual, you can get all of the information. And because it's virtual, it allows us to visit other parts of the world. So we will be going to Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, and learning about what's happening in fiber art in those three countries. We'll be hearing about different kinds of patchwork, embroidery, indigo dyeing, traditional textiles, and contemporary textiles as well. Because the presenters are presenting in their native languages, everything will be subtitled in English. And that means that we've been able to preview the presentations, and they are amazing. Do not miss this. It really is an incredible body of work that these wonderful artists and curators are going to be sharing with you. And you do not need to be a SAQA member in order to attend. You just need to register and pay the registration fee. And we'd love to have you be part of our virtual conference. Today, we are very fortunate to have artist and educator Gillian Cooper talking to you about her work. Gillian Cooper's work is a holistic practice, integrating her love of landscape and history using drawing and fabric. Her work has expanded further through her recent master's in contemporary art and archaeology with the University of the Highlands and Islands in Scotland. Her work has been featured in exhibitions across the UK and internationally, and has appeared in a number of publications. Gillian runs an award-winning teaching practice, both in person and online, about textile art and sketchbooks, including City and Guild's qualifications. And we were just talking before the show about how she will be teaching at Festival of Quilts this coming August. Gillian recently became a member of both Quilt Art Group, an exhibition group, and also the Textile Study Group. Congratulations to Gillian. We are going to be showing a pre-recorded video that is simply easier for Gillian and her internet to do it that way. And one of the things that we wanted to let you know is that in order to share it through Zoom, the quality had to be downsized a little bit. So if you want, once we post it on YouTube in a few days, the really high-res images will be in the YouTube recording. So you can have the opportunity to really see, every single stitch and every single detail that may not show up as well in this Zoom version. The advantage of being here, though, is that after the presentation, Gillian is here and it will be available to answer your questions. If you have questions as you're watching her presentation, please post them in the Q&A box. That makes it easier for us to make sure that we see your question and can ask Gillian to respond to it. So without further ado, here is Gillian Cooper's presentation.
Thank you for inviting me here today. Fragments of the Past is the collective name I've given to a series of ongoing work based on explorations of place, time and repetition. This series started as a result of the Master's course in Contemporary Art and Archaeology that I undertook with the University of Highlands and Islands in Scotland. This was an online course based in Orkney College, which was at the epicentre of early British habitation, despite now being considered on the northern fringes, making it a great place to study archaeology. The course, run by Antonia Thomas, an archaeologist, and Anne Bevan, an artist, was a new interdisciplinary course. It had instant appeal for me as it merged two of my long-term passions, art and history. Full-time, it should take 15 months, but due to other commitments, it took me 4.5 years. Going slowly was fantastic, as it meant I could absorb what I was learning and integrate it into my practice naturally. As well as being an artist, I also have a flourishing teaching practice, and this takes significant amounts of my time. The course enabled me to have a focus and rigour to my art practice, as well as giving me deadlines to make sure it happened. As I'm sure it is the case for many of you too, the paid work has to come first, so often the art doesn't happen as I'd like it to. I've a long running interest in the past, and when I started the course in 2020, it was with the intention of making work inspired by ancient pottery, such as these Neolithic pots, which are in the collection of the National Museum of Scotland. I love how you can often see the imprint of the maker's hand in them, and how the patterns can look as fresh today as when they were made 4,000 or so years ago. Or perhaps I would make work about the standing stones, as stones are also a passion. This photo is part of the Ring of Brodgar on Orkney. However, I was completely wrong, and my work ended up somewhere else entirely, somewhere deeper and more exciting and much more localised. Partly this is due to necessity. Yes, I'd started the course in January 2020, and due to the strict lockdown rules, I couldn't go very far for the first year or so. But this hyper-focus on the small mundane parts of life and finding joy in every day was something I'd explored in my work in the past, and it felt natural to return to it. In the first module, we looked at reading the landscape and exploring the site. I decided to base my work on a short walk along the fringes of my village, past what is considered a medieval motte, but may actually be an Iron Age fort, down a gully, then along the former mill path besides the banks of the River Endrick, coming out at the site of the former textile mill. It sounds idyllic, but telling you it is known locally as the sewage works loop perhaps brings it a bit more back down to earth. It is a lovely walk, even though there are barely any traces of the mill standing, as that is where the sewage works is now, but there's a lot to see en route. I didn't want to make a quilt based on the view from that walk. I wanted to encompass as much of the walk as possible in a form of kind of deep mapping. I had the fabric, which I'd botanically contact printed over the previous year with plant matter from that walk, and I also rusted some fabric using metal found on the walk. Some of it I did in the studio, like the ones on the left, some on site. I tried wrapping rusty fences, but without much luck, as the fabric kept drying out, even when wrapped in plastic film and with me spraying it daily with water. Goodness knows what the other passers-by thought. I'd more success with an old lump of agricultural metal which had been dumped in the burn. I wrapped the fabric around it and left it in the flowing water. This is one of the resulting pieces on the right. I decided to make the number of pieces in the quilt the same as the number of steps along the riverside part of the walk, 2,512. It is comprised of 1, 1.5 and 2-inch squares. With hindsight, I couldn't have made this piece without lockdown. Life was turned upside down and all of my teaching commitments were cancelled in the short term. The making of this quilt was really good for me. I could bury myself in it. It was repetitive and soothing, and I knew what I was doing: cutting, stitching, pressing, repeating. It took me away from all of the uncertainties and the worries of the world. When I showed this quilt in an exhibition in Edinburgh, I displayed it over a large branch of wood collected from the walk. It was on the ground. I didn't cut it down deliberately. I overheard some visitors tutting about the poor quality of the quilting in the ditch. And they were right. In my defence, there are lots of joins and there are many different weights of fabrics used, so it wasn't easy. But I do dislike stitching in the ditch intensely. And I'd used it only because it had seemed the only form of quilting that was right from this piece, not to take away from all of the beautiful fabrics used. And that is why I show it in an art gallery rather than entering it at the Festival of Quilts, because yes, the quilting is maybe not up to quilt show standard. At that point, I thought I would continue making work based on this walk and the village's history. But during a lecture, Anne Bevan mentioned a project she'd undertaken based on Edinburgh's old water system, which in the Victorian era had pipes made of elm wood. This got me thinking about Glasgow's water supply, which travels 30 miles, about 45 kilometres, from Loch Katrine in the wilds of the Trossachs to the city via the Loch Katrine Aqueduct. It was built in 1859 and is still in use today. It is environmentally friendly, very environmentally friendly, as although it only drops about 7 metres, 20 feet from start to finish, it is powered entirely by gravity. It is also passes within a mile of where I live. These are some photos of it on its journey. The one in the middle at the bottom is the bridge over the River Endrick near me, carrying water, not transport or people, which I always find amusing. The building of the aqueduct was a massive project involving over 3,000 workers, tunnelling through solid mountains and building huge aqueducts to span valleys. And this major industrial structure is hidden in plain sight in the countryside by me. The countryside is as much human construct as cities are. There are signs to look for. In addition to the obvious aqueducts, much of the metalwork has finials topped with what I term a Glasgow rose. When I see them out walking, I know the aqueduct is nearby. I undertook lots of research online via a fabulous website called Canmore, which had details of all Scotland's historical and archaeological records by place. It is now part of the Historical Environment Scotland's website, and it is well worth a look. I had also discovered that when Scottish Water had moved headquarters a few years earlier, someone had discovered a box at the back of a cupboard they were emptying, and it contained negatives of photos taken when the pipeline was being built. I obtained permission to use copies of these. I also walked and photographed the route, trying to find current traces of it. I coloured fabric using plant material and metal found en route. This is one of the pieces in progress. I'd learnt through listening to my daughter's online schooling about the requirements for chemical reactions. I had to try and encourage her to listen, so I had to endure it too. The delivery was truly terrible. One video was 5 minutes watching water boil, but it did explain how heat and liquid helped the reaction go quicker. So these bundles were placed in plastic boxes on the radiator, which helped the staining go better. Despite all of these great resources, and partly because of them, I was having trouble pulling the project together. There was just so much. So to get me going, I started drawing from my photographs on top of my coursework, notes and ideas book. I found this really helpful as it meant I reread my notes and it gave me time to think. For the first month, I used some graphy tint paints and a black pen before trying felt tips for another month. I still can't get to grips with felt tips. I was much more at home with the paints. And from this, the notion started to emerge that I couldn't grasp the whole of the pipeline in one piece of work. It was just too big. So I started making little fragmentary pieces, tiny bits, and then organically these started wanting to be joined together into a long strip. Some of them have stayed on their own. But this made me think of the pipeline, lots of long, narrow strips joined together. These are photos of this piece by the pipeline. The actual pipeline is up on the top left of the photo on the left. You can't see it because by the time I finished this piece, the plants had started to grow again. When I display this piece in galleries, I show it bunched up in places. The exact layout changes each time. As this reflects my view of the pipeline, I'm unable to take it all in one go, and bits are obscured from sight. As you can probably tell, the pipeline or aqueduct really caught my imagination, and I'm still exploring ideas about it today. But at this point, the next module on the course was one called The Creative Reuse of Archive Film. I thought this would be interesting as it was well out of my comfort zone, as I didn't make videos pre-pandemic. And by this point, I was developing some online courses in textiles and sketchbooks, so I thought learning more about film would be useful. I based my work on a 1950s educational film called Our Water Supply. I found it in the National Library of Scotland, which is a great moving image archive with all sorts of films from home movies to major events, and much of it is available online, free to view. This film was really delightfully poorly filmed. In one scene, you can see the wing of the aeroplane in shot as it was filming out the aeroplane down below in the Trossachs. And it's a silent film, so it has panels with words and diagrams on it, and the words fall off the bottom of the screen because it didn't fit properly. As required, I made a film response, which I'm not going to inflict on you. I think the polite version is it's better I stick to textiles. But here's the first 10 seconds or so. However, from the beginning, I knew I also wanted to make a textile response. This wasn't required, but I wanted to do something tactile, and making the film meant I was spending so much time on the computer, I really wanted to get on to fabric again. Time was short, and I decided to use screenshots from the film as digital negatives for cyanotypes onto fabric. I wanted to explore cyanotype further, and this link between an early photography technique which used light and water seemed appropriate, linked with a basic film and also the time period for the pipeline being built was around the time cyanotype was developed. The printing of the cyanotype went well, and I toned a couple of them to yellows and browns for a variety. However, when I put them together, it just didn't feel right. I bashed on regardless, as I really wanted to submit some work on time for once, but it wasn't working. I felt I was doing everything I advised my students not to do. I felt a bit like I'd got my holiday snaps and printed them on fabric and stitched them together in rectangles to make the quilt. There just wasn't enough to it. So before I'd even finished the quilting, I knew I was going to cut it up. This actually felt low risk as I didn't like it anyway, so it was never going to be used as a quilt. I decided I wanted to make it in a 16 by 9 layout, the same as a current screen format. To do so, I had to cut it up very carefully. My calculation showed there wouldn't be much to spare. This meant I didn't fussy cut any of it or make conscious decisions to use certain sections in ways I thought they would work. And actually, I think this worked better, as the squares ended up far more interesting than how I would have chosen if I'd cut them deliberately. Another random element was the placement of the squares. Although I did cheat a little bit, it wasn't totally random, as I curated it a little bit to make sure the browns and the yellows were apart from each other. The finished quilt, called Pipe Dreams, has 2 parallel lines on it in red. These represent the 2 pipelines. The aqueduct was so successful, a second one was built alongside it 20 or so years later. The lines follow a cross-section of the pipeline as it was shown on the original film, our water supply. Originally, I wanted it to slope across at the right angle, but it just looked like I hadn't placed the line straight, so it has an artistic lean to the right. And I live at the bottom of the line at the lowest point of the route. I like having work outside and photographing it outside. So this is Pipe Dreams in a small quarry near me, which was used to extract stone to build some of the aqueducts as it crossed the valleys. Rather than bring the stone in, it was excavated locally. I did try photographing it beside the actual aqueduct, but it just looked tiny and lost. And I couldn't get to the place I'd intended to photograph it, as there were signs across the path saying "keep out" due to a pheasant shoot. I take my art seriously, but there are limits, and getting shot in the name of art's one of them. But I think it looks meant in this green and wet space. The structure of the course meant we had to undertake 6 modules and a final project. I've glossed over the modules in theory and writing. I'm really a textile person, not an academic. They were helpful and not very visual. Due to the part-time method, the very part-time method I was undertaking the course, I still had the following final module to complete, but I had to wait until the following semester. A glutton for punishment, I decided to take an extra module to keep my hand in, and spent the next 3 months absorbed in art and the environment. This was personally challenging, very challenging, focusing my attention on the impact of my art on the environment. The clothing industry is responsible for 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions, and the average person in the EU uses 26 kilograms, 57 pounds of textiles a year, and discards 11 kilograms, 24 pounds. And this is before we get into thinking about people who work with textiles as I do. This is just on average. I'd already been thinking about the implications of my work, and this took me to the point of paralysis. Everything I do has an impact, probably for the worse, on the environment. So how could I do anything? After a lot of consideration, I have carried on. The impulse to create is as old as humankind, and it is one of life's pleasures. But I do think very carefully about what I'm doing. I had a short detour into layering up images in photo collages. It is easy to think of making photo collages online as better for the environment than making textile art, but that is because impact is hidden. Do you know it takes as much electricity for a Google search as it does to boil a kettle? It's just that we don't pay directly for it, so we don't notice it the same. So it was back to textiles for me, as they are the form of art that talks most to me and have a tactility that photographs do not. It is a difficult balance to navigate because if we are too precious with our materials, we lose some creativity and experimentation. But I do try to be mindful of what I use. To this end, for my project this module, I wrote down everything I used to make the piece. Another walk in the woods is constructed from fabric I'd stained with leaves collected on a local walk near Aberfoyle. I'd cut it up into tiny strips to make a large patchwork, but I'd not used that many of them, and I knew I was never going to get this finished, so this seemed a perfect use for these pieces, and I felt pleased I was reusing fabric rather than buying new. And many of these fabrics had already been passed on to me. I like using fabrics with a history, and I can look at it and see some of the linen passed on to me from a friend whose mother had run a B&B in a town in the north of Scotland. Her mother bought the sheets at auction when a hotel was replacing theirs and mended them to be suitable for use in her B&B. Other bits included some offcuts of silk from a neighbour who had used them to make wedding dresses. More came from former altar cloths from a church on the south side of Glasgow when they decided to replace their damask linens. All of this adds meaning to the piece for me. I sampled away, trying cyanotype on top of the patchwork, liking the way the tannin from the botanical contact printed fabric interacted with the cyanotype differently on the different fabrics. You can see that it's on the silk ones, it's gone a browner colour, and the print is less clear than it is on the pieces that were cotton. And again, it's different on the flax. The list of what I used to make this piece ran to many pages. Here's just some of it. I also tried to work out where my materials had come from. How many times round the world had they gone before they even reached me? Not just the fabric, but the needles, the threads, the scissors, the sewing machine, and so on. It is slightly over the top, as I have included the walking boots worn in the walk and the bag to collect the leaves, but to me that was all part of it. My tutors in the course loved this list as the artwork itself, more than the actual quilt, but I was really pleased with this quilt. To complete the course, after undertaking 7 modules, I had to do a final project. We had the choice to do either a practice-based one or a written dissertation. Guess which version I went for? I'd spent a long time thinking about what I was going to do for this, and I mulled it over on my regular morning walks, thinking about what I wanted to make and what did I want to say. I was tempted to go more in depth on either the pipeline or my village's history, but I realised through these walks that what I really wanted to examine was the whole walking, drawing and stitching impulse. Rather than the work being about a specific place, I wanted to look at the links and the rhythms and repetition of walking, drawing and stitching. As I've come to say as my almost like a catchphrase, one step, one mark on paper, one stitch, on their own they're fairly meaningless, but grouped together they can become very powerful and consequential. I was also interested in what happened when you moved from one activity to another. I wanted to use this to look at the small, everyday, mundane walks, the type of thing I undertake, not some epic hike through scary terrain, which I love reading about in books by authors like Robert Macfarlane. I wanted to look at my everyday, the small, the boring, the mundane, the things I do. I started taking a photo each day on my morning walk. There are 2 circular walks about 50 minutes long from my house, and most mornings I do one of them. I find it's a really good way to start the day. especially as I work from home and probably wouldn't leave the building otherwise. I walk the walks in all weather, and as it tends to be at the same time each day to fit in with family life, it can be pitch black in the winter. It's really nice when spring starts and I start undertaking the walk in the daylight and I can actually see my feet again. Both versions of the walk go out of the village and out of street lighting. But if I go on the one up on the moor, I can walk in the dark without a torch, as it is relatively even ground, and there is light from the moon or stars, or the mist reflecting the light back down. And there's a faint glow from Glasgow in the distance. I find it really heightens my senses. I took a single photograph each day on my walk. I tried to limit it to one, being selective, like we would have been prior to digital cameras, to focus on what specific thing had caught my attention that day, helping me notice the small changes in weathers, in the seasons, and how I felt. These photos are some from the moor walk. This seemed like exciting territory, but the initial issue, as per normal, was where do I start? I find I think well not only through movement. If I'm stuck, I'll go out for a quick stomp round the block to clear my head. But I also find I think through making. Keeping my hands busy helps ideas formulate. And I find I need to start with the obvious to give time for the more thoughtful to emerge. And to give myself time to understand the link between what I have in my head and what comes out in the fabric or paper. Knowing this, I started with the idea of recording time through tally marks, so I had a strong symbol to get the making started. This is the first tally mark quilt using jelly plate printing with leaves collected in the walk, and each block has 5 tally marks on it. Tally marks are an old way of keeping count. My partner refers to them as 5-bar gates. 4 lines, then a 5th one goes across to make it easier to count up in groups of 5. They're a very old way of keeping count. And as notches on pieces of wood on tally sticks, these were used as a form of accounting until the 19th century in the UK. Each stick was split in 2 so you could tally up the 2 sides. I called this quilt step count. I find one of the hardest things is actually naming pieces, and I can make the work, but actually naming them is much more difficult than the actual stitching. So yes, it's not one of the better named ones. I wanted more layers and a huge number of marks, reflecting the time and number of steps made. So I experimented with breakdown printing the tally marks onto fabric, cutting the fabric into blocks, padding out larger tally marks on the quilt, and then hand stitching lots of tiny tally marks as the background quilting. I liked these pieces and how they were developing, but given the intense hand stitching involved, they're very time consuming. And I felt that I wanted to explore the idea of walking, drawing and stitching further. So I put them to the side and I've continued to stitch them since I started this, often during Zoom calls and other quiet times. I also find it a good way to start my day in the studio with 20 minutes of tally mark stitching to give me time to think about what I'm going to do today. The second one in the series on the right was only completed last month, but the 3rd and 4th are underway. I went back to my source material and started drawing from my photos in a small sketchbook, again a daily habit. I like the idea of regular habits. I find it helpful in art, though I don't keep them up quite as often as I would like to. What I liked, though, about these was how I could see the sketches from the previous day coming through the thin paper, layering up my walking images together. But this felt quite sanitised. Walking, taking a photograph and then drawing it. Each move away from the original source walk seemed to soften it and blur out the details. It became very sanitised. I decided to explore, could I merge the walking and drawing together? I tried this in many different formats. I took a strip of paper out with me each morning on my walk, with a pencil or a pen. To begin with, I drew standing still, but these are a bit stilted. And quite honestly, it took too long. I didn't have much time as I had to get back home to get some children off to school. Although I do like the one where it rained on my water-soluble graphite pencil. It gave far more exciting marks with the water drops than I had in the drawing, as you can see on the top left. It added a randomness and a life to it. I tried drawing my movement, as you can see on the bottom left, just holding my paper at hip height and seeing how the pencil moved as I did. I tried drawing directly onto the fabric whilst I was out using Inktense pencils, as you can see in the right, but I was never happy with the colour, so I went back to paper. The most successful ones were drawing whilst I was walking and layering them up over a number of days, as in this one, which is 4 days of the same walk. I had my paper in front of me and a pen or pencil, and then I drew quickly as I walked past something, because once I was past it, I couldn't draw anymore, and then had to move on to whatever my eye caught next. The church tower often appears more than once as I walk up towards the church and then round the side of it. And it is amazing how the hills ended up at the same point on the paper in each of the 4 passes. The first one I did with a water-soluble graphite pencil, and then there's a fine liner pen, and then I did another pen, a grey pen, and finally there's a black marker. I found this quite exhilarating, doing all this walking and drawing. It was a complete dopamine double whammy of having undertaken exercise and drawn all before 8 a.m. It was a great way to start the day. I tried many different variations of this, such as in the dark. However, it turned out that although I didn't think I was looking at the paper whilst I was walking, and needed not to fall over, and also wanted to concentrate on what I was drawing, I was actually constantly referring back to the pencil position, as the ones drawn in the dark are very scribbly and very different to the ones drawn in daylight. And this in total, although I was walking whilst I was moving, and it only added about 5 minutes on to my daily walk. I did consider walking and stitching, but that felt like one stage too far. The idea of the needle unthreading or having to how to keep threading needles whilst I was out, and would end up stabbing myself with all the needles, and I could double the thread over and tie a knot in it to keep it on the needle, but then what happened to that needle when I'd finished that thread? Yeah, I just haven't worked it out yet. Perhaps one day. I liked the walking and drawing though, it was going well. So the next question was how to explore this in stitch. I had liked the layering of my drawings and I'd made a series of them in tracing paper, really quickly to keep the immediacy of the sketch. I'd intended to layer them up using the window as a light box to create the whole, but I realised that I live in the 21st century and it was much quicker and easier to do so on a computer, and this also allowed me to play with the scale. These are some of the layered drawings on the computer. The one on the left has about 9 smaller drawings brought in to it. I started playing with colouring some of the layers, thinking about them in terms of applique, and as you can see, it is really quick and easy to move them around. At the same time, my experiments in cyanotype were continuing. I'd made some really large fabric cyanotypes, which I was really excited by. However, they felt very precious, as I wouldn't be able to replicate them for many months, as these had been made in late autumn in Scotland, and we just don't have that much UV light. In fact, I wasn't able to make another large-scale one until the following September, as not only do I need strong sunlight and dryish grass for something this scale, but also low winds, so the leaves didn't blow away. Like many of my students, I was reluctant to do anything to these beautiful cyanotypes in case I ruined them. However, as a byproduct of them, I had some large paper cyanotypes which hadn't worked as well, and I'd also damaged them whilst washing them out in the bath. Fabric ones are definitely much easier to wash out. I decided to use them as a basis to add my drawing to. I tried a small sample and was pleased with the effect. I bonded it onto a thin layer of fabric to give some stability for stitching, and I'd filled some of the holes using some thin botanical contact printed paper. I liked the idea of the thread ends being loose and connected across the piece, connecting all of the different views and the repeated walks together. After two pieces about 30 by 24 inches, 60 by 75 centimetres, I decided to make a really big one using the largest piece of paper, approximately 24 inches high by 60 inches wide. That's 60 centimetres by 1.5 metres. I ended up putting the drawing on top and stitching through it. I've done quite a lot of work where I put a drawing on the back and stitch from behind, but this doesn't work as well with the paper as the puncture marks were too visible on the top. I had considered using dissolvable fabric, but for some reason I decided that I wanted to go with stitch and tear as the paper was quite delicate. It was quite a tussle getting it through the sewing machine, with the grain of the paper dictating how it could be rolled up to get it under my basic Bernina. And the removal of the stitch and tear that the drawing was on took about 35 hours, a full work week. I ended up having to use tweezers to try and get some of the smaller pieces out, and it got everywhere. It was like confetti. No matter how careful I was, there were bits of it trailed all over the house. However, I think it was worth it. This is it hung outside for photography purposes on the walk that inspired it. It has 10 different drawings layered together to give the whole. Although I like it hanging on bulldog clips, for the purposes of exhibition it is now mounted on a piece of natural denim and stretched on a frame, and I'm calling this series Walk, Draw, Stitch. Again, not great at naming pieces, so I've gone for the literal. By this point in the project, I was in the flow stage, where everything is just working and you have more and more ideas. And when I'm in that stage, you just have to ride it for as long as it lasts. So continuing with the idea of layering my drawings to give a sense of the repetition on the walks and of time passing, I layered up 14 days of drawing on top of each other on a largish sheet of paper, it's A2, using a different medium each day, one drawing a day. I stopped because by the 14 days I was struggling to see any mark I was putting down, even though I'd changed to a white pen. I photographed bits of this drawing and cut the photos into squares, laying them out in pleasing arrangements, mishmashing the days and the walks together into a pattern, much as my mind does with the walks. I don't remember any singular day in detail of the walks, as there are so many similarities, but there are little bits that emerge as key points, and there's also the things that recur each day. I changed these patterns into grayscale and used them as a basis to draw on some long vertical strips of fabric using art graph, which had been one of the media I'd used for the original drawings. These works are called desire lines. Desire lines are the paths people take, as opposed to the paths that be put in place for us to use. Often inconsequential, like cutting the corner and cutting across the grass. But I also like to think of these as my path lines on my daily walks. In winter, I can sometimes see my footprints from earlier days as the grass has been frosted and it's bent the grass over. So the next day I can see where I walked. And these build up over time as I follow a very similar path each day, but perhaps it varies a few feet to the left or the right. It's also reflective of how the paint went on the fabric, and the same for the stitch that was added later. It ran where it wanted rather than precisely where I'd intended, creating a more organic and lively piece. There was one final piece out of this initial series of fragments of the past. For a week, rather than drawing each day whilst walking, I wrote words about what I was seeing and thinking and feeling. Given the everyday mundane nature of these walks, this is not profound. Just things like how nippy it was feeling with clear skies and a full moon, or the pheasant squawking an alarm as I walked nearby. I don't know who got the bigger fright, me or the pheasant. Again, I layered these words up using a different pen each day. I had to transcribe the words as soon as I got home each day, as they became pattern rather than words very rapidly under the layers. I took these words and stitched them onto a long stitch of fabric, again botanically contact printed, kind of leftovers from leaves collected on the walk. The fabric was over 10 feet long, about 3.2 metres. And just like on the paper, I stitched each day's words on top of the other until they all merged together into the background, with the odd word catching your eye. This strip of fabric was looped back on itself to make a Mobius loop to emphasise the days running into each other, the walk continuing and layering up on each other, a whole that is different to its sum parts. It was really strange after the master's course finished. It had taken up so much of my life for the 4.5 years, and it gave me a great focus to my work. Since completing it, I've exhibited the work in the UK, and I'm looking to exhibit it further. I've continued with my explorations of walking, drawing and stitching, and looking into the repetitions and translations between them. Most recently creating a series of stitch pieces based on pottery shards found on the walks. I've also undertaken some side projects like creating a series of cyanotype quilts which hang outside in some woods near here, and I still want to go deeper in exploring the pipeline, which I'm hoping to do so soon. Thank you so much for listening. I'd also like to thank Antonia Thomas and Anne Bevan of the University of the Highlands and Islands for their support and encouragement through the course, and for introducing me to archaeological thinking and how to look at the world differently. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. That was really fascinating. Just how day by day your walks accumulated both marks and then words and then stitches. It really is an amazing celebration of a daily practice. I
Oh,
wanted
thank
to
you.
I wanted to ask you about your practice of displaying your work for photography in outdoors, because you said that you do also display it in galleries, etc. But what draws you to putting it out of doors for that final photograph?
I suppose I like putting the artwork in the place that inspired it. So I feel
Okay.
it's got a connection with it. And yeah, it makes it more real than a clinical gallery setting. I mean,
Hmm.
I love gallery white walls because it gives a very different look, but it gives me a different feel about the work, so I can think about it differently.
Hmm. I think we were all blown away by that incredibly detailed cataloging of all of the different things you were using in your artwork. And I wanted to revisit a question um, from Michelle that you answered to her, but I think everybody would be interested. What was the strangest thing that you cataloged in all of the things that you were using for your art?
Um, It's really well, Michelle, I think, found one of them because I put the car down because I had to drive to the place I was going in a walk. But there's also things like there's the oil to lubricate the sewing machine. There's, every different type of needle that I used and all the threads. And it was amazing just how the in one small piece there were so many things in it. There's
Hmm.
also a fish kettle, because that's what I use to steam the botanical contact printed
Hmm.
bundles.
Hmm. Sure. Yeah, and you mentioned also your boots and your cell phone camera, and really a fascinating exercise, and I think one that would be interesting for any of us to attempt. Stephanie said, have you thought about incorporating pieces of nature into your work? I know you're using it for botanical printing, but have you experimented with, actually putting leaves and what have you into your work?
Not a huge amount. I have done some pieces using pottery shards,
Hmm.
uh, because as a result of the course, I did what we termed a scrap swap with a potter who was on the course. So she sent me some of her pottery shards. I sent her some of my offcuts of fabric, and we
Hmm.
used each other's materials. So I
Oh,
encased
nice.
them inside, some of them I encased inside fabric pieces, and others I used to make kind of shells that I then liberated well, they're like little husks that I liberated the pottery shards from.
Hmm. Two different people have asked you to repeat where you took this master's course because it clearly inspired an amazing body of work.
Yeah, it was a really good course. It was with the University of the Highlands and Islands, who are based in Scotland in the Highlands and Islands, and it was online. And it was a master's in contemporary art and archaeology. And what was lovely was it wasn't only textile people. I was actually the only textile
Oh.
person on the course. And so we had lots of different inputs, and there were people from all over the world, not just Scotland.
Hmm. Yeah, and clearly they we're very successful at drawing a great deal of creativity out of your practice. And we really have enjoyed seeing the results so far. Obviously, you're continuing to make more work that is inspired by these same various objects and practices. So I wanted to thank you again for sharing with us today. Um, it's been a tremendous privilege to see your work and to hear you explain your process.
Thank you so much for inviting me to give the talk. It's been lovely to share it with you all. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And to our audience, please do check out SAQA.com/ virtual to hear more or to read more about our upcoming conference later this month. We hope that you will join us. And please do tune back in to Textile Talks next week. We have another exciting program coming your way. If you enjoy Textile Talks, please consider making a donation to help support Textile Talks. The program as a whole costs almost 50,000 US dollars per year, and we appreciate any donation that you feel moved to give us. But Gillian, thank you again. And to our audience, it's always wonderful to see you.